I got my friend Jim Trotter here. Jim, long week, crazy week. How are you?
I think like a lot of people, man, just trying to keep my head above water and get through all of this. You know, it's funny, Chris, I said to somebody, look, I've been covering this league for over 2 decades. I can't remember ever going into the 2 weeks preceding the Super Bowl and just so much going on in this league, man. It's mind numbing, you know?
Yeah, and you kind of wonder, like, with obviously the Brian Flores news is going to be the elephant in the room. Like, that's not going to wash off in 2 weeks, and it shouldn't. And this is probably going to go deep into the offseason. Like, what kind of shadow does this cast over the game? And do you feel like there is momentum that people are going to be talking about not supporting this event from an NFL standpoint?
Truthfully, no.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I think football fans are like Pavlov's dogs. When the whistle blows, they come running.
Yeah.
And this is a league, a Teflon league that has shown very little sticks to it. So, look, Chris, as you know, the only time that we have seen real change in this league as it relates to diversity or anything else is either when there is the threat of litigation
Right.
or the threat of sponsors pulling out. Those are the only two things that I've ever seen lead to substantive change in the NFL. And so I am wildly curious as to how this lawsuit that Brian Flores has filed is going to play out and what change it ultimately will lead to. But as to the game, no, man. On February 13th, 70 plus million will be watching, if not more. And the game will go on and everyone will celebrate, and that will be that.
So you said something, I mean, we said this yesterday. I think these owners are bulletproof. It's incredible, like the things they can get away with. You use the word Teflon. I mean, we've seen it up close and personal. So I don't know. Do you feel like with this kind of unprecedented turn of events and somebody that I know personally in Brian Flores, and I'm not surprised, but I'm incredibly proud to know him, do you think that something like this makes people more hopeful or less hopeful because it exposes how shitty, the state of affairs is with regards to the Rooney Rule?
Well, first of all, I'm one of these people who has never focused on the Rooney Rule. I think that's like, it's like one of these shining objects that people always talk about and point to, but don't really understand what the purpose of it was or what the purpose is. Rooney Rule was implemented first off back in the early 2000s, again, after the threat of litigation from the late Johnny Cochran and Cyrus Mary, who were going to sue the NFL over discrimination involving its hiring practices as it relates to head coaches. So the Rooney Rule comes in and says that you have to interview at least one minority candidate at that time. We now know it's 2 external minority candidates. But the whole point of it was just to slow down the process and to make owners take time to consider someone other than who they might be considering, particularly a person of color. So I don't focus on that. For me, it's more about, as Tony Dungy has said to me, the owners simply don't know how to hire head coaches. These are people who don't come from football backgrounds. They're not brought up in football culture. And as one general manager said to me, it would be the equivalent of one of these owners, if they owned a software company, asking me, a football guy, to come in and lead a search for a chief engineer or something like that in a field that they know nothing about. And so when I talk about this as it relates to owners, Tony Dungy said that the league needs to have a class for owners to learn how to hire coaches. And initially I thought he was being facetious. But I'm now, as I watch as this process goes forward, I'm not so sure he's wrong, because owners are so interested in winning the press conference that they lose focus of what it takes to win games.
Right.
And that's the issue here for me, because what they do is they say, okay, this is the hot candidate. If we hire this person and it doesn't work out, we've got cover, because we can say that's who everybody said we should hire. So we did. And in 2 years, when it doesn't work, we'll get rid of that person and we'll do it all over again and say, who is it that everyone's saying should be hired? And we'll hire that person, and we've got cover again because this was the hot candidate, the top candidate. And it's just like a perpetual cycle here that's just so frustrating, And I'm going to say this, and I'll get in trouble for this, but okay, we've had 2 black general managers hired this year. Neither one of them hired a person of color as a head coach. Now, I'm going to sit here and say, I don't know what authority they had to actually make the hire, But all I know is that if we as blacks aren't hiring our own, how the hell can we sit here and continue to criticize white people for not hiring us? And that bothers me. I mean, I'm just being 100% honest here. That bothers me to no end, because we know as blacks, there are people capable out there, blacks capable out there to do these jobs and who are qualified to do these jobs. And yet when we are put in a position of power to hire, we don't do it. Why is that?
Do you think that attacking the pipeline, like through which we feed these head coaching vacancies, like there are certain positions, I was explaining to people listening to the pod, position groups, coaching groups, like quarterback coaches, O-line coaches, linebacker coaches on defense, that it seems almost intentional that black coaches have been siphoned away from these pipelines. Do you think that there's any hope in attacking those pipelines? Because I feel like, even a GM of color who's making his first decision, maybe he's looking at the pool and saying like, fuck, there's just not enough representation in the pool. I feel like, can we attack that and get some sort of positive movement?
Well, look, I'm one of those people who thinks the pool, the pipeline excuse is total bullshit.
Yeah.
And that's just me. Because again, it gets back to define for me what a head coach is. Tell me what you are looking for in a head coach. And so I make the argument, people say, well, what's the solution? Well, first of all, why do blacks have to come up with a solution to a problem they didn't create?
Right.
But having said that, if I could offer some advice, I would say this. Owners need to have a clear vision of what it is they believe a head coach is. Tell me the character traits. Tell me what you are looking for. So for instance, before you ever interview anyone, sit down and make a list, like a pros and cons. Do you want a head coach who is older or younger? Someone with experience or no experience? Someone who is a delegator or someone who's hands-on? Someone who's a motivator or someone who sits back? More the CEO type, or the guy who you don't care how people view him publicly? Make a list of all of those things. And then as you go through the interview process, once it is over and you've made your hire, now go back to that list and then tell me, how many boxes does this person that you hired actually check?
Right.
And to me, that's one way of at least trying to be objective in the process and saying, we did have a vision, we did have a plan, we followed through on it, as opposed to we got in an interview and we got wowed by somebody, or the media told us, or an agent told us, or a consultant told us, this is who we should be hired. At least there's some objectivity in that to me helps with the process, the transparency of the process, as opposed to what's going on now.
So where do you think we are with this now that B-Flow has levied these allegations, has filed suit? Like, it is class action. Are we going to have more guys stepping up and talking? I mean, like, it sucks to say like black coaches have to solve this problem, but like it seems like there's an opportunity here for people to share their stories. Hugh Jackson alluded to a culture in Cleveland, which is unsurprisingly not designed for winning. No explicit like bribery or anything like that. Obviously, he talked about Stephen Ross in Miami. B-Flow did. Do you think we'll get more of these accounts?
Chris, it's a great question. It's one I've been asking the last few days of minority coaches that I know, asking if they're going to join this suit. And the best answer I can give you is I don't know.
Yeah.
Because they don't know at this point. Many of them have told me they're still sifting through the lawsuit, trying to figure out what's next. Because they know if they do sign up on it, there is the possibility that they've just jeopardized their career.
Right.
And so they've got to consider all of that. And that's a major step. So I don't judge anyone on what they do. I do know that for substantive change to happen throughout the course of history, it usually requires sacrifice. So who is willing to sacrifice in this moment? And again, I'm not judging anyone. You do whatever you feel is best for you. But here's what I will say to you, and it's something that I'm considering writing, as I talk to these men, is that I ask the question of whether or not, just as you did, are other coaches going to join on to this? And ultimately, what I believe is the answer will determine whether or not this is simply a moment that garners headlines, or whether this is a moment that produces substantive change. Which way is it going to go? It's too early to tell. But I do know that I'm not sure there will be a moment like this again, because again, it takes a coach saying, I am willing to sacrifice my career to try and make change. And Brian Flores has done that.
I'm curious about the potential sacrificing, the jeopardizing of a career. That sounds to me like you would be very surprised if B-Flow were still a candidate in Houston or New Orleans or anywhere else.
I think it'd look bad if he didn't get the job in Houston. Bad.
And you think
I thought he was the front runner
this
anyway.
suit hurts his prospects right now and moving forward potentially?
No. I'm not saying that it hurts his prospects right now. I'm saying the possibility is there that it could.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If you may not know, after this lawsuit came out, me being a wise ass, I tweeted out, look for a black head coach, the first black head coach in this hiring cycle, to be hired in 3-2-1.
Mm-hmm.
Because my feeling was the league was going to turn around and say, you know what? Or one of these owners was going to say, we're going to give ourselves some cover and we're going to hire a black head coach right now to take some of this focus off of this. Now, it hasn't happened yet. Will it happen? I don't know. But all I'm saying is that the possibility exists that you could be sacrificing your career.
I just think B-Flow has been so good so early in his coaching career. It would be so obvious why. I mean, there are people, and I don't buy this argument because I played Colin, and we've gone here. I won't go back to it, but Colin was blackballed. There are people that can make bad faith arguments and some ignorant arguments that he was blackballed because he wasn't very good at the time. Brian Flores is a fucking hell of a football coach and was winning games in Miami in a division with Bill Belichick and Josh Allen and, of course, the Jets. I don't think you could deny what would be going on here if we hire Josh McCown in Houston and somebody else in New Orleans, some hotshot coordinator. I just don't think they could deny it this time.
We're about to hire Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota.
Right.
And I know Kevin, and he's a good guy and he's a good coach, but are you objectively going to sit here and tell me that he is more qualified and capable or even proven to be a head coach than Brian Flores?
No.
Or even Jim Caldwell?
No.
I mean, I could go down the list of names. Chris, this is the thing. It is just so exhausting. People always say to me, owners should be able to hire who they want. They should be able to hire the most qualified. And I say to them, I agree with you.
Yeah.
100%. But if we are talking about the most qualified and if we are talking about the most capable, if we were to do blind resumes, and I was to take Jim Caldwell's resume or Eric Bieniemy's resume,
right,
and to put it up over here and to have Kevin O'Connell's resume,
right,
or Nick Sirianni's resume or whoever and put it up over here, objectively, there is no way you can tell me that these resumes over here are more qualified than these over here. So if we're doing it that way, then what are we talking about here? We're not hiring the most qualified or the most capable. There's something else at play. Objectively.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I agree with everyone who says the most qualified should be hired, but that's not what's happening here. And even I go back to Zach Taylor. And I was one of those people when he was hired, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I said he didn't deserve that job. He was not the most qualified. But what the Bengals told me privately was, we know he's not ready, but we believe in 2 or 3 years he will be ready, and we would rather get in on him now than get into a bidding war for him in 2 or 3 years. And it has worked out in their favor, in part because they got an incredible quarterback 2 years ago. But why is it that Zach Taylor gets that sort of privilege or opportunity, whereas other young black coaches who we can talk about names who have been identified as people that are going to be successful head coaches, or at least you believe they're going to be successful head coaches, they don't get that opportunity. They're not afforded that. So there's so many things here that don't balance out, but people want to focus where they want to focus. Now, let me say this. In terms of B-Flow's lawsuit, we can focus on the discrimination in terms of hiring practices. But in talking to black coaches, one of the things that stood out to them even more than that was this allegation of being paid to tank.
Yes.
Because all we hear from the league is integrity of the game, integrity of the game.
Right.
And if you have an owner who is a part owner in a gambling site, which reportedly Stephen Ross at least was a few years ago, and he is now telling his coach, in essence, bribing him to lose games, does that not equal game fixing?
It's bad.
Isn't that a federal crime?
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad on a league level. Now, you and I use the word Teflon. I say they're bulletproof. Like, I don't think it's happened before. The guy in Carolina kind of got forced out, but stepped down, I think, on his own on his own volition or whatever it was, didn't he? Jerry Richardson.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what one of his fellow owners told me.
Yeah.
He stepped down because he was older.
Yeah.
He was not in great health, and he just didn't want to deal with the bullshit.
Yeah.
That's what one of his owners.
So they've never actually had the balls to force a guy out who's doing the wrong stuff, and I wonder here, because there's another element. I mean, there's fixing games, which is, as a player, that makes me upset. Okay, like, you know, you and I talked about late last year in Philly. You know, there was a decision made in the 25th hour of that season that might have affected a draft slot. It sounds like Stephen Ross was like, "Hey, $100,000 handouts, my man, at the yacht." Like every time we lose a game, and that's part of a bigger master plan. So if I were to deduce that it was part of a bigger master plan, then that calls into question the motivation of hiring Brian Flores. And it makes me feel like maybe they used Brian Flores, which makes me upset on another account. So the Venn diagram crossover is pretty fucking big. It's not quite a circle, but there's a lot of fixing. There's racism, in my opinion. I mean, it calls into question, like, what did they do with David Culley in Houston? We
knew what that was.
Yeah. Well, it's humiliation. It's humiliating to think that Brian Flores was called in to possibly shovel shit and actually made chicken salad and still got fired for it. You know, it's like, it's wild to me.
And guess what would have happened if he had gone 2-14?
He would have got fired, and somebody else would have had the fucking quarterback.
This is what makes me angry here too, Chris, from a media standpoint, is how quickly we are willing to just take what someone says anonymously and run with it and put it out there. When Brian Flores got fired, all of a sudden it came out, he's difficult to work with. He's this, he's that. And instead of the media saying, some of my reporter friends saying, let me go investigate it and find out whether or not it's true, they just put it out there. And to me particularly, and again, I'm biased, I don't hold back or hide that. But when you do that to a black man, to me, it's so easy and it's so lazy and it's so insulting and it's so damaging because it sticks that there is this narrative that we are the angry black men and we can't be worked with and whatnot. When all Brian Flores was doing, based on coaches I have talked to in that building, was trying to do the right thing and and have told me that he is the most honest, the most direct, the most stand-up guy that they have ever worked with.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I hear that, and now on the other hand, I've got media friends out here saying, well, he was difficult to work with. Was he difficult to work with because he was doing the right thing?
Right. It's probably a good thing that he was difficult to work with. If he was easy to work with, that would make him, like part of a fucking, a tanking thing. And I have you identified any other times in league history you're like, I suspect tanking? I mean, there's an attempt here. You had Hugh kind of talk about a culture. I was on really bad teams, one that moved to LA. You know, like it felt like sometimes we weren't trying to win. I'm not saying that we weren't trying to win, but do you think this has happened a lot before?
Look, I'd be naive to say that it hasn't, but I do know this. I've never met with a player who has told me he intentionally tried to lose a game he wanted to lose a game. So that's the only purview that I can come to this from. I don't know what goes on in upstairs in these offices, these front offices, and with owners and whatnot. So I would not want to accuse anyone of anything.
Right.
All I do know is that every player I've ever talked to in my career covering this league has tried to win every game that he has participated in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think tanking can be done almost by just turning a dial a little bit upstairs, like without anybody knowing. There's so much that goes into a football season. You can do that so covertly. You can't do that in basketball. It's harder to do that in baseball, but like in football, they can just adjust that dial, spend less, bring in older veterans, guys that can't play anymore, whatever. Do little things.
Personnel.
It's personnel.
We need to see what we've got with the young guys.
Yep. I mean, a lot of times, yeah. So whether it's the older guy or the younger guy or whatever, I mean, it can be done. I was going to ask, with Ross and discovery and all this stuff, like what would it take to get to discovery for this case as a whole? Like, do we need more evidence? somewhere in New York or Denver, or like, do we have enough in Miami? I hear Cameron Wolf says there's a witness. What would it take to go to discovery? And discovery is what we want here. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to believe that's what Brian Flores and his team wants. And really, that's the only time that the NFL acts, is to keep things from getting to discovery. So from my standpoint, I've been told that there are other people in the Dolphins organization who were aware of this taking place, who claim that this has taken place. One coach told me he heard about it some time ago, but it was not from Brian Flores. It was from someone else. And this is before the lawsuit came out.
Yeah.
So I would assume that these people are going to have to be deposed. And at that point, if these allegations are made and supported by these people, then I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but I would believe at that point then that it would be open to discovery. And now, even in the case of the discrimination element, you've got these text messages from Bill Belichick. Well, I have to believe that is, that's grounds for discovery, to say, well, then we need to see the other phones that are involved in this.
Who texted Bill? That's what
Exactly.
I want to know. I want to know who texted Bill. And like, there's so much I want to know here. And discovery is not limited to, is it limited to this case? We get more Gruden emails. We get more, information on Cap, on, some of the back and forth between ownership. Like, what are the limitations of discovery?
Again, me not being an attorney, I can't answer that. I think based on what little law or knowledge of the law that I have, it would be up to the judge to determine the scope of discovery.
Yeah.
But as we found out in the Washington football team investigation, there can be a lot of ancillary damage.
Yeah.
And man, at least from my, viewpoint, novice viewpoint, sure seems like there's enough here for discovery to get to it.
This would be one of the biggest. I mean, it's already one of the biggest sports stories, whether people know it or not, but potentially it hinges on a few factors. All right. But like, if this goes to discovery, I think this is going to be one of the biggest sports stories of the past 20 years. I mean, like,
but here's the thing, Chris, and then this is what's fascinating to me is we all know whenever it gets to that point, the NFL has always been successful in paying off people to settle,
mm-hmm.
right? And there is that saying that everybody has a price. I'm curious, does Brian Flores have a price?
I don't think he does.
That's going to be the key point here. To be honest with you, back during the Seau lawsuit, when I was told by a family member, we won't settle. We want to know who knew what and when.
Yeah.
And I just said, okay. And I sat back. And what happened? They settled.
Right.
So I'm not trying to be
right. No, I mean, like, listen, the cynic in me says that, yeah, like money can do almost anything. But at the same time, B-Flow levied this claim on behalf of like all black coaches and like, and he's opened the door for other people to come with him. I feel like by design, it's not a personal decision for him anymore. And that's a big burden to bear. But I think he's the type of guy who can bear that burden. I'm incredibly, I don't know, like I'm not a black coach. I'm not somebody who's worked in the NFL for a long time and seen this stuff and scratched their head and shook their head, like seeing my peers go through this. But I am hopeful. Like as somebody who wants the right thing to happen, I was excited that B-Flow did this. It sucks that we're here, but I was like, fuck yeah, let's go. Like go nuclear.
I tweeted it at the time that I saw it. It's about damn time that someone did this. But I'll say that this is what people, I think the average fan doesn't really understand about why Brian Flores would do this. Like, I'm going to have a story soon that includes this passage from a retired coach who happens to be black, and he will be on the record. And he talks about, I quit the game because of exactly what Brian Flores is talking about. This is someone who played in college, coached some of the best players ever at his position, became an offensive coordinator, was not the play caller, but was the run game coordinator, ran all of the offensive meetings, everything else, and could not get an interview for a head coaching job. And said, when you bust your ass for your adult life to try and get to the highest levels of this league and know that you can't get there, not because you're not qualified or capable, but simply because you are black, it messes with you. And so for his own mental health, he said, I'm done. And he walked away. And he said, the good thing for me is I was good with my money. I put it away so I could do that, unlike some people who have to stay because they have to support their family or whatever. And what he said to me, because he's been out a few years now, and what he said to me is that, Jim, you have to understand, this shit stays with you. Even when you leave the game, it stays with you. And I don't think most fans really understand that. And it's one of the reasons I fight so hard for this, because believe me, I don't want to be out talking about this stuff all the time. But these men can't talk about it publicly for fear of reprisal.
Right.
And so I just feel now at this point in my career, I don't know how many years I have left, but however many years I have left, I want to use whatever platform I have to give a voice to these men so that hopefully there won't be other coaches who do what this coach did and say, you know what, I love the game so much, but the game is killing me mentally, emotionally. And so I've got to get away from it. It just breaks my heart when I hear these stories because it's just not right. It's not right.
It's not right. These guys work too hard. And, it's almost irrelevant to me that the league is made up of 70% African-American players. Like, it's about the ability of the coach. And I've had some amazing coaches of color, some of my favorite coaches. And it does really suck to hear your perspective on this and also those coaches. So
based on what you know, Jim, the story you just referenced, are we living through another one of those right now in Eric Bieniemy?
Oh, I've written it. Before last year's Super Bowl, I wrote a story about Byron Leftwich and Eric Bieniemy, both offensive coordinators in the Super Bowl, both men of color, both highly respected, and both incredibly capable. And Byron Leftwich at that time didn't get one interview for a head coaching job during that cycle. Eric Bieniemy, I believe, was on his 8th interview and obviously had not been hired. So I pinned this tweet to my page this year during this hiring cycle saying that sadly, I believe that Eric Bieniemy is becoming this generation's Sherman Lewis. And there's a lot of people, younger fans, who don't know who Sherman Lewis was. Sherman Lewis was an offensive coordinator with the Green Bay Packers back during the Super Bowl years under Mike Holmgren. Underneath him on that staff, you had position coaches all the way down to quality control assistants, and 5 of them, I believe, who went on to become head coaches, all white, and he didn't get an interview for one, or he didn't get a head coaching job. So you had Andy Reid, who was a tight ends coach. You had Mike Sherman. You had Steve Mariucci. You had Marty Morningwig, and you even had John Gruden, who was a quality control guy. All of these guys went on to become head coaches, and Sherman Lewis, despite being the offensive coordinator for a Super Bowl winning team, did not get an opportunity. And to me, this is simply history repeating itself again with Eric Bieniemy, who has all of the qualifications to have an opportunity to be a head coach. And I'm not even saying be successful, but to succeed or fail on his own merits.
Yep.
And he can't even get that opportunity. Why? Especially when, we don't have to go, and you guys know the story, the 2 coordinators before him both got opportunities.
Right.
So what's the difference? Why does Doug Peterson get the opportunity? Why does Matt Nagy get the opportunity? Why does Eric Bieniemy not get the opportunity? Seems to be only one common thread through all of this.
Yeah, and you mentioned Byron Leftwich in the Super Bowl, and this year we've got a coordinator in the Super Bowl who's basically a shoo-in for a job. So, it's unfortunate. I hope that we see some change. And Jim, thank you so much, as always, for joining us and shedding some light on a very serious topic.
Bro, I always appreciate being in here. I appreciate the discussion.
Listen to the full podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast streaming platforms. Wherever you want to get the podcast, you can get the podcast. Pretty simple. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Podcasts get pretty wild. This is real tame.